So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for our business travel sessions organised by the Global Business Travel Association. And I'd like to thank Catherine Logan, who's sitting next to me here. She's the GBTA's Regional Vice President for Europe, the Middle East and Africa. I'd like to thank her for partnering with Arabian Travel Market to make these two sessions happen today. And thank you also for inviting me to moderate our first discussion today, which considers the future of business travel. Now, in the Middle East, business travel is the lifeblood of this industry, and it has certainly started to pick up in 2022, which we're going to hear about today. This afternoon, our panelists will discuss what business travel will look like in a post-pandemic world, and as a severely impacted sector, when and how it will fully recover. We will also discuss some of the mega trends impacting business travel and the medium-term forecasts for the return of travel. Now, setting the scene today, Catherine will provide a global overview, including key insights from the GBTA's latest Business Travel Index, the BTI Outlook. And we'll be following this up with some regional insights from Sam Dawson. Now, he's the Commercial Director for the Middle East and North Africa at research firm YouGov. There's Sam sitting there next to Catherine. We will then plunge into a lively panel discussion. You're going to be lively today, panelists? Involving leaders in the world of business travel. Now, I'd like to introduce them to you. We have sitting over there on the end, we have Sean Anderson. He is Head of Sales for Donata Travel Management. Now, Sean has vast experience in different facets of corporate travel, including operations, global business management, TMC partner management, and strategic sales. And sitting next to him in the middle there, we have Matthew Roberts, Vice President of Sales at Accor, India, the Middle East, and Africa. And he has more than 20 years of experience in hospitality sales and distribution across the entire region. And joining us virtually today, and I'm hoping he's going to be beamed up onto the screen any moment, do we have Matteo? Yes! Hi, Matteo. Welcome, Matteo Atti, the Executive Vice President of Marketing and Innovation at VistaJet, joining us from the UK today. Now, Matteo leads the global marketing team in charge of the entire customer journey at the global business aviation company. So thank you to each and every one of you for taking the time to be part of today's session. So, Catherine, I'd like to hand over to you first.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Gemma, and thank you very much to the panelists for agreeing to participate and support us in this panel. I am really delighted to be here with you all in person at the Arabian Travel Market. And, you know, I think we'll all agree it is such a welcome change from the digital interactions that have dominated our life in the last 2 years. Now, the business travel, like, you know, all elements of the travel industry, has been rocked by this pandemic. It's been a roller coaster few years, and unforeseen world events such as the current situation in Ukraine continue to test the resilience of our industry. But as we have seen, with all challenges comes new opportunities, and as we start to return to a new type of normal, we start to see some new mega trends emerging. And before we look at some of these trends, I'd like to spend a few minutes looking at the state of the business travel industry. So if you could bring up my slides, please. What we have seen is that business travel spending is expected to recover to $1.48 trillion by 2024. That is at 2019 levels. And this is according to our GBTA Business Travel Index, the BTI Outlook, which we published in November 2021. The global business travel activity has already begun its rebound from a sharp downturn brought about by the pandemic after declining 53.8% in 2020 to $606 billion. And global expenditures are expected to have increased by a mere 14% in 2021 to $754 billion. But what we're expecting is a really strong bounce back in 2022. And I think we're seeing it here. The numbers who are at this event are up, far exceeding those who attended last year, and a substantial proportion of what we saw or what the Arabian travel market saw in 2020 or 2019. We're expecting a surge as recovery and pent-up demand, which I know we all feel, kicks into a higher gear, bringing global business travel spending back to over $1 trillion for 2022. And we think that this trend is supported by our own monthly GBTA polls, which we do with our members, and from feedback that we're hearing from across the industry. Now, there are amazing graphs that you will see very shortly. And by 2024, as I said, we're expecting global business travel to have made a full recovery, ending the year at $1.48 trillion, or just above the 2019 pre-pandemic spend. There you go, fascinating graph. But however, it's not coming back the way it was. It's going to vary by region, by country, and by industry over this period. And that's due to economic and political factors such as the persistent COVID-related threats, disruption, supply chain strains, something that's coming up time and time again, labour shortages, rising inflation, and increased costs. Yet to be determined are potential impacts of emerging factors, including the broad adoption of remote working models, long-term cuts or elimination of business trips and travel volume, and the increased focus on sustainability practices and policies for business travel. But where is recovery now? And as I mentioned, GBTA has been regularly surveying its members, business travellers, or business travel buyers, suppliers, and other stakeholders from around the world since the pandemic began. We started these surveys in February 2020, just to take the pulse of the industry as it navigates the challenges and the changes on the road to recovery. The latest poll results released at the end of April show that business travel is surging forward. International travel is returning, and despite new challenges, industry recovery is entrenched. Now, 80% of companies now allow some or more domestic business travel in their country, and that's an increase of 13 percentage points on our February poll. Similarly, 55% of companies now allow some or more international business travel within their country, and that's an increase of 26 percentage points on our February poll. Corporate travel bookings are returning. 88% of suppliers and travel management companies report their bookings have increased on the prior month. This is a much higher share than said the same in February. And we are seeing more companies resume travel with double-digit increase in both domestic and international travel. So it's not just that they're allowed to, they actually are doing it. Companies who report that they at least sometimes allow non-essential domestic travel has increased by to 86%, up from 73% of February's poll. And international travel made a big jump, with 74% reporting their company has now resumed. And that was up 26 points on our February poll. And what we're also seeing is the employees, all of us are really keen to get back. 94% of our buyers felt that their employees were now willing or very willing to travel for business in the current environment. And in fact, no respondent from any region right across that survey felt that their employees were not willing to travel for business in the current environment. On average, travel buyers say their company's travel bookings are currently at 50% or 56% of pre-pandemic levels, up 22 points from February. And on average, travel suppliers say they are seeing business travel bookings at 44% of pre-pandemic level, with little change since February. So I think as we can see from these slides, travel is returning. There is good foundation for growth, but we want to now look at the mega trends as to how it's returning. First one, the trend is new opportunities for business travel. Now, the pandemic has redefined business travel as we knew it. Travel for business could now include travel for work, as remote and hybrid working models become the norm and corporates look for new ways to bring dispersed teams together. This new way of living and working brings opportunities for business travel. Commuting for many is now a new kind of business trip, and the digital nomad lifestyles that have also become a perk that some workers seek. Very, very important in that whole war for talent. However, although we have people working away from the office or people wanting to work where they live, wherever that is in the world, a return to base is a necessity for collaboration, team planning, and instilling a company culture. You know, I'm sure we have all heard stories of corporations letting go of their real estate or downsizing, choosing to spend their office budget on team getaways instead, and appreciating that face-to-face meetings are still a necessity. And there is no denying the direct correlation between a return to office and return to business, but the rules have changed. Secondly, people first. The health and safety and wellness of employees, especially travellers, matters more than it ever did. Travel policies and procedures have changed from being about productivity and savings to pre-pandemic to now focusing on minimising risk. Corporates recognise the need for diversity, equity and inclusion in the workplace, and that includes travel and meetings. Building culture and community when offices are closed has become a new challenge, impacting employee loyalty and the great resignation as employees have joined and left jobs without ever personally meeting their colleagues. Travel buyers and the corporate travel programme has a role to play in helping to recreate company culture as they impact how employees experience that culture, and in those rare in-person opportunities, it's really vital to create a connection and a unique experience. And it's also worth noting that corporate wellness is now a $2 billion global industry. The third trend, sustainable choices. Sustainability is now a firm fixture on the corporate agenda. It's no longer a box-ticking exercise or a nice-to-have. There is an urgency towards carbon neutrality, and we all recognise the need to make responsible choices that weigh up the ROI of the business trip with the cost, time, and environmental impact. Business travel suppliers have developed tools to help travellers make the right choices. As an industry, we need to look at the end-to-end journey, all the touch points, and not just about air. At convention, our GBTA convention in the States in November, we unveiled a new Sustainability Leadership Council. And just a few weeks ago, we launched an extensive landmark research study, The State of Sustainability in the Global Business Travel Sector. This industry-wide report reveals barriers to achieving more sustainable business, as well as the enablers for a more sustainable future. And I would urge you to take a look at that report. And it's available for free at gbta.org. Our fourth trend, self-service is a must. And I know that that may feel sort of counterintuitive in this particular market where like a high-touch service is so valued. You know, the corporate travel self-booking has been around for a long time elsewhere, and I've never seen so many people so eager to DIY everything. And during the pandemic, this trend accelerated. You know, just think about how we all adapted to accessing a restaurant menu through a QR code on our phone. Touch-free check-in, often aided by biometrics, is something that many road warriors gladly sign up to speed things up, to keep us out of queues anywhere along the journey. So that is some part of the service that people are looking for. And DIY personalisation helps travellers' choices become their first options, tailoring the service to them. Even customer service has become more DIY, with many brands paying a lot of attention to their Twitter mentions, especially from unhappy customers. And this all helps, when embraced properly, to deliver a seamless end-to-end travel experience. And finally, trend 5, digitalisation. Remote working has fueled digital innovation, and it continues to accelerate within our industry. The mobile device proliferation is a huge part of this trend, and there really is an app for everything that increases accuracy and the speedy resolution in everything from pricing to booking and servicing automation options. Now, where things like cryptocurrencies will take us next along the digital journey, I don't know. But suppliers and intermediaries are testing things out, so I think there is a lot more to come on this front. We are in a new area of business travel, and those who do not move with the times will get left behind. We have a wealth, as GBTA, we have a wealth of research and educational resources online, and so I would urge you to visit our website. But I know that our illustrious panel have a lot more to share on this topic, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was really interesting. So we'd now like to hand over to Sam from YouGov. You're going to provide a few regional insights. So welcome, Sam, to the stage, please. Thank you.
Hey everyone. So reiterating Catherine's words of how great it is to see in-person events back and all the buzz around ATM this year. Thanks to ATM and GBTA as well for inviting YouGov to share our data and insights on business travel sentiment in the region. As you will see, this is a topic that is constantly evolving given the market forces at play, and we're really excited to play our part in helping the travel industry navigate the landscape and capitalise on the opportunities that are presented. So what is our data telling us about the future of business travel in the region? Well, as a major headline, it's positive, with the Middle East experiencing the highest business travel sentiment throughout the pandemic, which has helped kickstart a recovery. I'll obviously deep dive into those findings shortly, but before I do, I just want to give a brief introduction to the data sources used in the presentation. So YouGov have been building an ever-growing source of consumer data for over 20 years now. Today, we're able to understand what 20 million registered panel members in over 55 markets are thinking on a daily basis. And what we call this is living consumer intelligence. So it's connected data that's not just a snapshot in time, it's always on and it's constantly evolving. Now, during the pandemic, obviously, there was some well-publicized challenges for the travel industry. And so we developed two tools to help understand the modern post-pandemic traveller and how the travel industry can adapt their strategies going forward. So two of the main surveys that we've used as part of this presentation is YouGov Global Travel Profiles, which is a daily survey. It tracks consumer demand and attitudes about travel in 25 countries. We've also used YouGov Destination Index, which is an always-on destination brand tracker, collecting data about people's perceptions of the world's most popular hotspots daily across 16 different measures, and again, over 25 markets. We've also drawn data from YouGov Profiles, which is our in-market deep audience intelligence tool, and an international omnibus study run at the end of March in 8 countries amongst over 13,000 adults. So let's start by taking a look at the overall Middle East landscape in terms of travel consumer sentiment. Using trended data from the question, which, if any, of the following trips are you planning to take in the next 12 months, gives the most up-to-date forward-looking indication of recovery based on traveller intent. And really, the key message in terms of trends is a show of strength. Travel sentiment in the Middle East shows great signs of recovery, especially internationally. So domestic leisure still leads the way, with 41% of the general population intending to take local holidays, but this has been trending downward over 2021 and 2022. On the other hand, international holidays have been trending upwards and closing the gap, with 37% planning international leisure travel in the next 12 months in the Middle East, and that's 17 percentage points ahead of the global average. It's true that leisure travel is recovering quicker than business travel, but the signs are there an uptick in business travel sentiment. And at 13%, the region is 7 percentage points ahead of the global average when it comes to international business travel intent. Sentiment amongst those based in the MENA region is only one side of the story. So we also use YouGov Destination Index data to see how the region is tracking in terms of consideration for an upcoming vacation amongst general population of a few key source markets. So using the UAE as an example, generally sentiment has been fairly resilient from India, UK and the US over the last 18 months. Now there's obviously trended data on a monthly basis, so things like seasonality obviously play their part, so the UK winter sun escapes show a peak. and obviously travel restrictions in different markets have also impacted the trend. But it's also encouraging to see the likely impact of Expo 2020. So you can see in the blue boxes here, which represents consideration at December 2021. From India, US and the UK, there was an uplift from the previous period. And a major factor for that is likely to be Expo 2020. We see similar trends amongst business travellers, but with even higher consideration scores, emphasising the potential opportunity for business travel to experience a country and lead to future leisure vacations and vice versa. Now, you might be wondering why we are presenting data on leisure travel in a business travel session. Whether you call it workation, pleasure, or blended travel, the trend is clear and appears to be here to stay. It's therefore important to not consider leisure and business travel in isolation because the lines are blurring. From a regional perspective, this particularly is a major trend in Middle East key source markets across APAC, slightly less so in Europe, offering new opportunities to lure travels for longer stays and higher value trips. So for instance, in the recent Omnibus study that I mentioned at the start, around 7 or 8 out of 10 Indians, Filipinos, or Indonesians want to take a pleasure trip in 2022. Going back to the question of travel intent over the next 12 months and zoning in on business travel in individual markets, Saudi Arabia, UAE and Egypt are all showing signs of recovery off the back of improved sentiment towards the global COVID-19 situation and relaxation of restrictions. However, it's clear that market nuances do exist. So in Saudi Arabia, domestic business travel still is king, but it's been challenged by international travel in March 21 and March 22, with 12% now intending on international business travel in the next 12 months. The postponement of border opening to May 2021 can also be seen in the Saudi Arabia trend here in terms of uptick in intention in the following months. When it comes to the UAE, the biggest change has been in domestic travel, where there's been a 7 percentage point increase since October 2020, but it's still behind international business travel, with strong intention underpinned by data showing that 39% of UAE business travellers cancelled or were considering to cancel overseas travel plans, but that's versus 59% in the same period of 2021. When we dive a little bit deeper into business activity and trip frequency, we can see the recovery has been an ongoing process, with 58% of business travellers having taken more than one business trip over the last 12 months. Just under 1 in 2 have travelled by air for business over the last 12 months, but this is still quite a bit lower than in October 2020. We've seen in particular a greater bounce back in hotel stays and car rental in Saudi Arabia, likely reflecting domestic trips. So the overall message is, signs for optimism, but there's still significant recovery to go. The proportion of the population that haven't travelled for business or leisure in the last 12 months is still above pre-COVID levels by around 10 percentage points. Catherine sort of touched on this earlier. If business travellers are increasingly treating corporate trip planning more like they do for personal travel, and a traveller-first mentality requires to be adopted, then it's even more important to know who you are targeting, how and where to reach them, and what the barriers to travel are. So to demonstrate the regional nuances that exist, use YouGov Profiles data to compare business travellers in the UAE with those in Saudi Arabia. So UAE business travellers are more likely to be in the 25 to 34 age demographic. Around 60% work in the private sector. Saudi Arabia business travellers over-index in the 35 to 44 age group versus the general population. And top industries are construction, manufacturing and retail. When it comes to how you can reach these business travellers, social media is still the most effective platform for travel advertising across the region. But in the UAE, the second and third most effective channels are direct mail and online streaming, with in particular the latter experiencing a 11 percentage point increase since the same time last year, whereas in Saudi Arabia, online magazines and cinema are much more effective. Another trend that Catherine highlighted earlier was around businesses and travellers' desire to make responsible choices through all touch points of the travel journey. And this is just as relevant in the MENA region, both when looking inbound and outbound. So recent data from our Omnibus study show that 1 in 3 consumers said they're more likely to seek sustainable travel options when they travel for business or pleasure. And again, some of the key source markets for MENA, so India, Indonesia, and the Philippines, feel even stronger on these sustainability points versus other markets when it comes to sustainable travel for business. In terms of the Middle East business travelers themselves, through our profiling tools, we see high receptiveness to environmental statements, although separate market nuances do exist. So for example, 3 in 5 Saudi Arabian business travelers consider themselves environmentalists, but this has actually decreased versus this time last year. And they are less engaged versus UAE business travelers, where 69% consider themselves environmentalists and 60% try to buy only from companies who are socially and environmentally responsible. Appreciate I've thrown a lot of data at you there. It's a lot to digest, and we've only scratched the surface of this topic. So thanks again for giving me the opportunity to present, and if anyone would like to discuss the findings any further, I'm available after the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Sam and to Catherine. They really set the scene there, didn't they? So I think we'd now like to kind of layer this up with some more detail from our panelists. So I think first of all, it'd be good to talk about which of those trends really resonates with our 3 panelists today. And maybe if you could pick 1 or 2, because I'm sure they all do in some way. I will start with, just so you guys are aware, I'll start with Sean, then I'll go to Matt, then Matteo. I'm going to come to you online. Hang in there, Matteo. So Sean, which ones resonate with you particularly? And could you then add a little layer in terms of some extra that we didn't hear from those stats there? Oh, Mike, I think we need the mic turned up over here.
Testing.
Oh yeah.
There we go.
Fab.
All right, so I think probably 2 key points to mention here, Jim. And if I maybe refer to Catherine's figures she mentioned, just in terms of the numbers and trending back in terms of where we are to pre-COVID. Making a note of the numbers, I think you said buyers, the numbers overall are back 56% and suppliers 44%. From a Donata perspective, we pretty much slap bang in the middle of that. So our numbers are back 50% corporate to pre-COVID. This is UAE-based numbers. And the other driver market for us is Saudi. That's actually trending more just over the 60%. Why there? Obviously, a lot of domestic travel, a lot of mega projects happening as well there. So great to see that, at least from our business, we're pretty much in line with global trends. The other macro trends mentioned, not unfamiliar to us, I think very similar, but perhaps one to mention that was probably fast-tracked because of COVID was the digitalization piece and self-service. I think what in terms of engagement with clients, when there's no travel volumes, was the perfect time to take a step back, look at global best practice, and it really was all about driving digital and tech solutions to take the friction out of travel. So I think a lot of our clients now are in a really good position as the volumes pick up to maximize on those investments.
Great, thank you very much, appreciate that. Matt, within the hotel world, again, which ones of those resonate most strongly with you?
I'd like to take for the sake of stimulating debate,
we like debate.
I know, I thought you would. A contrary view on the numbers. I mean, I think the numbers were suggesting recovery by 2024, right? And I think to agree with that, I think there are certain megatrends that you're ignoring, and one is the extent to which we've seismically changed the way we collaborate, and particularly on internal projects. And previously, we would have travelled a lot more for that. It's completely changed working patterns in large companies, and it's significantly altered travel patterns. And I think no major company is going to ignore that in terms of a change of company culture, in terms of how they continue to collaborate and optimize productivity. And no CEO is going to ignore that from a cost point of view either. There's significant cost savings, and nobody's going to let go of that when they don't need to from a productivity perspective. So my view is we will never see a return to the same levels of business travel.
Matt.
If you look at, I know, contentious, right? If you look at, if you were to take a comparable, KPI and look at business travel spend per unit of production, you will never see a return to pre-COVID levels. Hang on, let me finish now. However, you will see a return to the total value of spend when productivity exceeds whatever GDP was in 2019. But per unit of production, whatever your company is, I say you will never see a return to the same. No company will ever spend as much on business travel per unit of production as they did pre-COVID, because they don't need to, and working patterns have changed.
So
and sorry, the other megatrend, I'm on a roll.
Keep going.
The other megatrend is sustainability. Business travel will be a significant part of a company's carbon footprint, and every company is making significant commitments, my own included. We're the first hospitality company to sign up to net carbon zero by 2050. And every other company and every other CEO is taking those commitments really seriously.
I do get what you're saying, but don't you think that the business traveller has changed? And we've talked about bleisure, blended travel. So it's different because people are coming, maybe fewer trips, but maybe for longer. They're having a holiday at the same time. They're doing a workation. So it's kind of one metric you're using, but the business traveller is different. Do you agree on that level?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely we see bleisure spend. We also see guests using hotels in different ways. Somebody mentioned digital nomads in one of the presentations. And, we're designing hotels with more co-working spaces, and we have co-working brands. So I do see that, but then what in terms of business travel spend, what you're seeing there is that a consumer's leisure spend may drift a little bit into their business travel spend. So
it's the blend, isn't it?
What's the business travel spend and what's the leisure spend?
Exactly.
And whose pocket does each component of the itinerary come from?
And I'm going to ask Sean about that in a minute, but I've got to come on to Matteo, because really COVID saw your business take off big time, didn't it, Matteo? And I know that we haven't talked about the value of face-to-face, but I know you've got a very bold message about that, and you have a Future of Business Travel report that really tells us that perhaps it's huge, and from your experience.
Well, let's say that, of course...
Right, we can't, sorry Matteo, we can't hear, so can we get the volume right up on Matteo, please?
Can you hear me now?
We can't hear very well. No. Can you hear, guys? Yep. Okay, cool.
Fantastic. Okay, so the view from the private aviation world is, of course, a different one than what the general business travel sees. We address the needs of CEOs and leaders of companies, right? So during the pandemic, we had this incredible moment where we could look at the value of business travel when business travel was not available. So what we went around and asked was, now that you cannot travel, how much is your business suffering? That was an experiment that we hoped we would never be able to do, but since we had the chance to do it, we started investigating that. And over 90% of the companies said that in one way or another they suffered. Now, what they suffered for and what is that they will need next, that is what I'm interested in looking at. So there is undeniable value in business travel. But what, as the other panelists were saying, is the new need for travel? Well, first one is, as a CEO sees the business, he will start saying that if a competitor wins a deal because his team did not go, he might decide that that was a trip worth going to. On the opposite side, you have a CFO who's saying, okay, let's start taking this opportunity to minimize the costing that are unnecessary. So what is changing, I think, is business travel will become less of a commute exercise where the head of a region would go to all the countries once a month to see them all, and becoming much more purposeful to critical travel. So everything has become more like the digital world of today, right? Where you see people going in for the minimum viable product and trying to prove their point. So even business travel will be dedicated to sorting out a specific solution, a specific need, more than a generic, I'm going to my branch, I'm going to my region, I'm going to meet a host of people hoping that something happens. So it's not that travel will reduce in general. The type of travel will change, but travel that produces results will increase again. And 87% of the people we interviewed are ready to fly even more as long as they have a purpose.
That's really interesting. So it's that face-to-face. Is it really the deal clincher travel we're talking about? The power of that face-to-face interaction?
It's the relationship element that cannot be translated through through a screen alone. The body language, the trust that you build in person is still such a big necessity as human being that we haven't got the tools right now to fully switch into a in-person solution. Also, the innovation and exploration. Imagine you're doing an M&A. The M&A is not just the numbers of putting two companies together. It is a culture, is the acquisition, is the talents you meet there. All these items are very difficult to read on a sheet of paper.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matteo. Now, I know, Sean, you want to jump in here and add to that, so go for it.
Yeah, I would love to. So I think exactly to what he's saying. If we look at what our customers are doing right now and what's the trends moving back, it's really about the meeting and the trip. And in the approval process, those hard questions are being asked, right? Why are you going? Do you want to go? What's the return on investment for the company? So I think moving forward, and I think it's on us as an industry to drive travel as more of a strategic discussion with customers, because it is for a particular purpose. If you think of the last 2 years, the agenda of travel's been around the boardroom. It hasn't been before. Why? Because employees have been stuck in countries. I need to get to KSA to see my customers. The borders are closed. How do I get my people there? So I think it's for us to elevate those discussions with our customers, because at the end of the day, you know, what does corporate travel do? Quite simply, it grows business, it grows revenues, it grows your customer base and ultimately GDP. And the second thing, it grows social, right? So really your company culture. How very difficult to try and grow that in a virtual side. So the collaboration, company culture. So two massive drivers for any strategic business. So the data and the stories we should be telling our customers should be far more strategic to drive the industry forward.
Thank you.
Proof of this is that the number of requests that we've been receiving on the private aviation side in the last 2 months, while the oil prices were skyrocketing, so of course the cost of services going high, has not changed at all. In fact, it has increased. So on one side, you have the disruption of the traditional commercial aviation world, which of course pushes traffic for critical travel towards business aviation. That is an obvious derivation of that trend. But at the same time, critical business does not suffer if there is an increase in pricing. So we need to be mindful of, if we nail the why you're traveling, then we can design around that new way of traveling.
Thank you, Matteo. Now, Matt, I'd like to look at what corporate travellers are demanding from hotels these days, and that's in terms of, could be price, sustainability. What are the key things that are coming through with the business travel that you're receiving? What are they really wanting from you guys, and how has that changed from pre-pandemic?
I mean, in terms of a buying habit that we've seen change, we've seen a massive shift through the last few years over to dynamic pricing from static.
Right.
You know, I think some of that is linked to manpower, you know, both on the corporate buyer's point of view, from the TMC point of view. We haven't had the people in the office, and for some of the larger global companies, these are very significant programs dealing with massive amounts of spend, and putting those programs together takes quite a lot of manpower. So we've seen a shift through to dynamic contracting, you know, as opposed to negotiating static contracts destination by destination. And we didn't really know, and I guess at this point in time, we don't know if that's a sustained change or if that will revert back as everyone's back in the office and we see TMCs re-employing again, or whether or not that will remain as it is. I mean, certainly what we see at the moment is that the growth in corporate spend on dynamic rates is still outpacing the growth on static rates. So it's suggesting to us that we might have seen a permanent shift through to more dynamic pricing in the corporate market, but time will tell.
Okay.
In terms of services, I think things that will remain in place will be elements of contactless service from the QR code menu. And I might be showing my age a bit, but there's an aesthetic for me in having a menu. But so maybe the Gen
Saves paper.
Yeah, maybe the Gen Xers will never be truly comfortable with QR code menus. But I don't see that going away, because there's an appetite to reduced risk, health and safety risk. There's an appetite for a contactless service where possible, which is going to push us into technology development.
Sure.
So how can we increase customer service through our app? How can we increase app-based food and beverage ordering, in-room food and beverage ordering, and things like that. Hybrid meetings, and having Matteo online is proof positive that this is something that's going to remain. One, because companies are changing what they travel for, and I completely agree with what Matteo was saying in terms of where it's a differentiator for business development. Companies will be there in a heartbeat and will be willing to invest more. Where it is, and Matteo summed it up perfectly, people going to the region and meeting a whole bunch of stakeholders, betting probably fairly wisely that something will come out of that, but not being able to put their finger on that before they travel. I think those trends are spot on.
Yeah. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here, because we are going to talk in the next session, we're going to talk about sustainability. So Chris, I won't talk about it too much, but Sam, I was really interested in your figures with the sustainability aspect. There was a lot of people there that considered themselves environmentalists. And also, Catherine, in your presentation, sustainability came through. Is this actually reality, or is it people going, oh yeah, I'm green, but are they actually making those decisions? Are companies making those decisions when they travel? Or is it just people in a survey ticking a box but not actually acting on it? And Sean, I guess, what do you think, first of all, from a corporate perspective? Are they now building this into their policy as you must offset your carbon emissions, for example? Is it happening, or is it people just saying they're doing it?
Good question. So if you asked this prior to the pandemic, I'd probably say it was very much similar to a tick box.
Yeah.
And it would often be driven by the multinationals, where you needed to submit CO2 data to the head office. However, and we also surveyed our top customers toward the end of last year, and 88% were saying, yes, sustainability is on our agenda. So absolutely, Gemma. It is a hot topic. It's part of the business plan, the objectives. And I suppose the role they're looking where we can assist is help us on this journey. So data is the key part. Then agreeing a baseline that you're going to compare that against. And then, yes, so what we're busy doing is putting greener options as part of our self-service option. So the traveller will choose a greener option, and there's a thing called lowest logical sustainable fare. Each company could define that differently, and the variables to that. But without a doubt, it's coming to the policies, and it's coming into the reviews we're doing on how we can help our customers reduce their carbon footprint.
And are there any corporates that are leading that, or sectors, for example, that are more on it than others?
Yeah, there are, and it's obviously the sectors where business travel accounts for the large portion of their footprint.
Right.
So consulting services, financial services, probably do a large amount of travel. They're actually beefing up most of the travel into KSA at the moment for us on the Dubai-Riyadh route, where I know it's been documented, CO2 can account for up to 80% of their footprint. So those are the real driver industries in this, for sure.
Okay, yeah, interesting to hear. Matteo, I mean, you don't always think of private aviation as particularly sustainable, but I might be completely wrong. Tell us, I mean, how does...
Well, it's something that would be silly to try and sustain, right? Of course, the amount of CO2 that is generated by an individual passenger on private aviation is higher than general aviation, and it's higher than trains, boats, and walking. There's no hiding behind this. What we are trying to do is trying to get faster than the industry. So even it is not an excuse. I mean, we cannot hide behind regulators that are acting very slowly into challenging companies into making change. We have taken the decision as the largest group in private aviation to actually speed up and become carbon neutral by 2025. And we do it of course, with a mix of options, one, of course, being carbon offsetting, which is the main option that is available to everyone, and we were the first one to extend it globally, but also through improvement in innovation. So how can we reduce the amount of fuel we use on each flight? How can we ask our customers to depart from an airport where we already have an aircraft so that we avoid to create an empty flight in between two planes? We are going to get very bold on SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, which in itself can reduce 80% of our emissions. So the tools are there. Of course, private aviation will always be more impacting than other means of transportation. There's no hiding behind this. But because it is a critical part of the mix of the travel options, we must and we have to make it much better and and we have to allow it to work much harder for our customers. Our customers are all asking for our credentials because as part of their Scope 3 emissions, we are an element in the mix. So they are pushing us, and we are absolutely providing the solution and the tools to be much more competitive and much less impactful than any other competitors. But it's a long road. It's a very, very long road. We have a new white paper coming out next week. I'll send you a copy of that.
Please,
with all the data and all the numbers so that we can try to advocate for immediate change and not delayed change.
Yeah. Thank you, that's interesting. So I'm going to keep it simple now and ask our panelists two questions. First one, what are the barriers to the recovery of business travel? And then, what are the opportunities and how do we pivot and think differently to take things forward? So we can start, Matt, we'll start with you. Barriers first. We'll do barriers, and then opportunities, pivots.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think barriers probably, to my mind, speak to what I've opened up with in challenging some of the numbers about a return to pre-COVID on business travel spend. Sustainability and cost, and the way that we've changed the way that we collaborate on projects and teams that are maybe not customer facing and not revenue generating.
Right.
So I think those three things are barriers to a full rebound.
Yeah.
And for all the right reasons. You know, it's not critical.
Yeah. Sean.
Yeah, pretty much agree with Matt. I think the only other one I'll add on to that is probably a bit of traveller confidence still.
Right.
I think there's still a fair amount of travellers out there who are nervous to travel. Thankfully, the friction and the PCR testing and all those sort of things are phasing out, so that should make things easier. So yeah, the key there is communicate effectively with your travel public, in the corporation, to give them that if something happens at the destination, you can take care of them, is the other one I'd add to that.
Sure. And I guess it's an opportunity, therefore, for you, isn't it? Because this is the resurgence of travel agencies.
Yes.
We need you guys to help us, to fall back on if things go wrong. Yeah. Matteo,
I was just, sorry, to jump in there as well.
Yes, Sam, go.
I suppose from a data perspective,
yeah.
It's mainly looking at consumers again, but it flows through. So price of travel has become the biggest barrier that we've seen change over the last 12 months. So across Middle Eastern markets, price of travel has gone to number one restriction. Health and safety has dropped off around 10 to 20% depending on the market. But that's again only looking at the Middle East. So you can't really have a one size fits all strategy for this, because we know, for example, that in APAC regions, health and safety is still a big thing. So it's like if you go to the airport, then APAC travellers will want to see all of the reassurance around health and safety, around COVID precautions. Switching slightly more to West and to Europe, then that starts going into impacting on the experience of travel, the personalisation. So it's a balancing act, but it's all about understanding the different nuances for each market in that respect.
Thank you. Catherine, did you want to jump in there quick?
Yeah, I was just going to say that what we're seeing as well is there's still a slight hangover from the pandemic where, people don't want to get stuck somewhere. So for instance, the fact that you still have to test before you go into the US means that people stop and think. So say if they've got something personal that they need to be at in 2 weeks' time, they won't necessarily take that trip because they don't want to, get stuck somewhere. And the other thing that we're seeing is just the whole thing around labour shortages. and the capacity constraints that puts on. You know, and it could be as simple as how long it takes for your visa application to go through, or whether or not there is the you know, the you know, a lot of the suppliers are certainly seem to be having an issue around staff shortages because of this labour shortage.
Right, okay. Matteo, any barriers to recovery that you can identify?
Totally, the disrupted travel infrastructure. So we are our biggest barrier to recovery. We are not, on average, as a travel industry, in the shape we were a few years ago, because regulations keep changing and all of that. So it puts an additional stress on the system. And the system is not as good as it was. Let's admit it, right? It's not as seamless as it was. The other thing is that geopolitical instability is still quite a thing out there. I know it might be something that we haven't touched much here, but people questioning, should I go, should I not? Which route should I take? Where should I do my business? We're talking business travel here, so we need to analyze, where do people want to grow? And there is a big question mark. Is the US market going up and down? Is Middle East going to be still a driver of growth? What's happening to Asia? Will it look inward or outward? So the economical and geopolitical instability is making people question, where should I go next? And then, of course, the element of costing, all the inflationary trends that we're seeing these days, they're putting immense pressure on long-term planning for both the companies' revenues, but also cost structures. And I think all these items together are playing into a very, very complicated mess where brands like ours, because we are incredibly smart, will find the solution, which are going to be the next question, I guess, right?
Yes, exactly. we can circle back. You can carry on with, you know, where do we go from here? You know, what are the opportunities? How do we pivot? How do we evolve to, you know, get around these challenges?
Well, there's going to be a couple of big items, right? In a time of insecurity, people will turn to brands they trust. So as marketeers, but also as service providers, that is the core that we need to build right now. Brands matter, and people trust big players with a solid reputation and consolidated track record on service. So that is going to be the first number one item we all need to play on. One of the items that, of course, a lot of big players have is loyalty programs, etc. That can act as a reassurance piece to it and whatnot. But of course, the other big item is simplification, simplification, simplification. We cannot justify the complexity out there and leave it out there. We need to take ownership of that complexity and solve it for the customers. They do not have the technical knowledge nor the time to sort it out. It is an extra cost we need to be able to absorb, to take in, and to resolve for our customers.
Thank you very much. Sean?
Couple things, you know, obviously the customer, right? So through the pandemic, a lot of the corporate buyers or people who are managing travel have actually taken on additional responsibilities. Potentially those responsibilities haven't gone away. So now more than ever, as a travel supplier, you can take that if you can take the white noise away from the travel buyer, because they've got all these additional responsibilities, you are a gem from a partnership perspective. There's that mention about make travel a strategic discussion with the customer, not a P&L line item about how you continue to drive savings, but how can you drive their business forward with purposeful travel. And then yes, we've mentioned sustainability. Use it as a differentiator because it's the need of the hour.
I like that, the strategy, yeah. Brilliant, thank you. Matt?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of areas. You know, one is looking at how the change in working patterns, the drift away from being office-based, and what opportunity does that create in terms of digital nomads? So, you know, for us as a hospitality business, you know, how that creates opportunity, I think, from a food and beverage and a space usage point of view in properties. And then also, I think potentially domestic business travel. If people are no longer living within a 5K radius of the office that they work at, if they're living, you know, 2 hours away, 3 hours away, or in another country potentially, then is that creating some business travel opportunity there that we can cater for? And the other thing, which was just, you know, I think Matteo touched on it, is doing a good job of communicating with consumers about how we can reassure them when it comes to their concerns.
Yes.
And I'm thinking around sustainability, and I'm thinking around any concerns around travel risk or health and safety.
Again, brands you can trust and
Yeah,
rely on to help
100%.
you, do what you need to do.
You're safe with us, and we're doing the right
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Sam and Catherine, is there anything from your research you want to add to that in terms of, the way forward innovation-wise, or from sentiment, or, the surveys you've done?
Yeah, I think the whole thing, and all of the panelists have said that the whole travel with purpose, not presence. I think that is actually, if we sort of extrapolate that out, it's more about business travel being more valuable. And I don't know about people here, but this is one of my most significant business trips that I've taken. And I am so much more present here than I would have been a couple of years ago. I would have been doing this, I would have been on calls, I would have been doing my email, and not necessarily really extracting as much value as I could from this trip. So that I think that's one thing. And I think the whole thing around technology and digitalization, given the technology boot camp we have all been on for the last 2 years, people are more open to it. And I think a lot of organizations have been very innovative around that. And I think that that's a huge opportunity as well.
Thank you. Sam, anything to add?
I think it's just sort of intention versus action, right? The data shows that a lot of people are intending to travel over the next 12 months, but actually when they come to it, what are the levers to make them travel? It's slightly same as what you were saying over the environmental and the sustainability points. The people who identify as an environmentalist are pretty high, but then if you start asking them about action points, about how they're actually acting on it, it drops off. Like, are they actually buying from sustainable companies? So I think for the travel industry, it's all again about, I would say this because it's from a market research background, but know your customer, understand all of the different passion points that you can connect with, how it's going beyond that specific customer and into their family, so that when they come to consider the ROI and the company comes to consider the ROI of that particular trip, you're able to hit a number of different pointers rather than just the pure kind of they're going there for that one business trip.
Yeah.
So maybe it is, getting the whole family over for holiday at the same time, and that's combining those two different aspects or going wider than that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much. Now, I think we've got about a few minutes left. We've probably got time for 1 or 2 questions, if we have any questions from the audience. Is there anybody here that does have a question for one of our panelists, or all of our panelists?
So this is a question to Sean, and combining with the Accor Group executive here, is when we talk about sustainability, which is very important at this time, and you talk about carbon emission, this really has a cost involved. So looking forward for the travel, I want to know the insight of the customer, whether they are ready to pay the cost involved, and if not, what are the measures? And when we talk about the hospitality division, how much cost have you incurred for sustainability, and is that the way forward? And if yes, then how much are you ready to spend for the next 5 years? Thank you.
Sean, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So there's no one silver bullet answer to this, right? So it's a case of sitting down with each of your customers, understanding their priorities and what their goals are, so that you can then align, and their budget constraints, so you can then align your solution according to that. But I think ultimately we all don't have an option in this, right? We're in a world where we can leave to our kids and so on. We all got to get on this and get on with it. So, and it's best to start at some point. At least from a corporate side, there's many low-hanging fruits we can tackle. Day trips can go away. Travel policies can be adjusted. All towards working towards net zero, and then it's the offsetting solutions. But it's all about consultative approach with your customer.
Thank you. Matt?
That's a really great question, and I'll mention it. I'll answer it from 2 angles. One is, what are we doing for buyers or consumers? And there's a couple of things. Where Accor has a program called Planet 21, which measures all of our hotels across a range of environmental and sustainability-linked KPIs, and that's data we can provide to buyers, and we see a greater appetite from buyers to provide information on our hotels' performance when it comes to environment and sustainability, so that they can make informed, responsible choices themselves. Another thing we're doing is a carbon calculator on meetings and events, which allows meeting and event planners to calculate the carbon footprint of an event, and then we can then provide them the opportunity to offset. Now, offsetting does then come at a cost to the buyer, and are they willing to to enter into that extra cost? I don't know. Time will tell. But the one thing I will say is that it does not have to be a choice about cost in order to reduce carbon footprint and achieve the goals that we want to set ourselves in terms of environment and sustainability. Accor was the first global hospitality chain to sign up to the 2050 target of being carbon zero, and in an effort to try and limit the global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees. And we've also signed up to that by doing that using the scientific method, which means we will not simply offset our carbon footprint. We will actually reduce our carbon footprint by 90%, and then we'll offset the final 10%. And that is, we further extended our commitment on that, because signing up to all of these accords and agreements is great, executing on them is something else. But we've further done that by entering into what's called a green bond. We did some refinancing last year, and our performance against specific sustainability and environmentally linked KPIs will determine our repayment. If we fail on our KPIs, we will have to repay more on the refinancing that we did last year. So that's us putting our money where our mouth is. But I mean, operationally speaking, moving in the right direction on water consumption, on utility consumption, has a cost benefit. Now, we might need to invest in more technology and other infrastructure in order to help us achieve those goals. But if we do it smart, it doesn't have to cost us more, and it doesn't necessarily have to cost our consumers more.
Great answers to those questions. Thank you so much to both of you. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please give all of our panellists a massive round of applause for today?